Good morning. Welcome to DVI Bushcraft Survival Sunday meetup. Today's topic would be bow drills or friction fires. So we started off with a little rain this morning, which is a perfect day to train on such a task of friction fires because being that everything is damp, we have to actually really work for dry wood. And that's one of the things that we're going to talk about in this class. Let's go over the components of a bow drill. So first off, we're going to pick something for our bow, right? So our bow should be about arm's length in length. It can be straight. A slight curve to it helps. So we can pick that. This can be any wood, and not a particular type of wood. I like something that's dry and not so flexible. So this is a piece of pine, and this worked pretty well. Here's one that's a little bit shorter. That again, this is another piece of pine that we gathered at the Hobo Forge Survival Skills event, right? So this is the one I used for the event, and we'll talk about attaching cord in a little bit. And here's another one. This one here is actually my atlatl thrower from the skills event, which we're gonna tie up and use for a bow for the class as well. So again, arm's length or a little bit longer, and there's some carving that has to be done, or at least something for the string to attach to. So in this particular one, right, so this one here, it's set up where you can see there's slack. It doesn't have to be like a banjo string. You have to be able to take your spindle and put it in, right? So one wrap like that is sufficient. You notice that this particular bow has two cords because I used bank line, and it's a little bit thinner to get the bite. I used two pieces of cord, or a cord folded in half. If this had a little more slack in it, I could even go for a second wrap, which will give me a little more bite on my spindle. This particular one here is using 550 cord, right? And this one here is mated up for this particular spindle. And you can see it's just tight enough to get a nice wrap. You can, if you don't have enough friction on your spindle, when you're holding this from the back end, you can use your thumb here to create a little pressure, which tightens up on your spindle. And lastly, we're going to tie up this atlatl thrower, right? So we're going to take approximately 3 to 4 feet of cord, right? And I have just overhand knots on the end of this. And what we're going to do is we're going to take and build a clove hitch and put it like that over the top of this. You can see your clove hitches there, and we're going to thread that through so our knot will actually stop it. So it's like a jam knot. So that's very secure. And we'll come down on this side. We'll do the same thing, another clove hitch over the top. And I'm going to build in a little slack. Like right there is about good. Clove hitch, tighten it up. And I like to do is I make a half hitch that goes over the top of this whole thing. And I sock it in, right? These are half hitches because they lock in nice. That's good. So now it's out of my way. I've got a lot of slack in this, but let's test this one. Not enough slack, we can go with another wrap. And now we have like so, right? You want your bow on the outward side of your spindle, right? So you're not banging into it as you're using the bow. So when we're going to wrap this, the way I like to do it is I take the top end of my spindle and I put it in and I twist it. And again, I put it in and I twist it. And there is a good example of that on 2 wraps. This particular one, the way it fits, same thing. I drop it in. My thumb pinches it so it doesn't ride down on the spindle, and I click it in. Again, it's riding on the outside of the spindle where it needs to be. So that's a little bit on the bow. Next is going to be the spindle. So the spindle, this one's a little long, but spindle doesn't have to be any more than the width of between your thumb and your pinky. All right, so this one here is a little short, but it worked like so. Now, spindle material, we need to talk about spindle material, fireboard material, and our bearing block material before we go any further. For your spindle, about a thumb's width is sufficient, and your board can be equal to about a thumb's width or a little thinner. I found that in some conditions having a fireboard that's a little too thick will prohibit you from building a coal. So the types of wood is a softer non-resinous wood, something that's free of oil, like very tarry stuff. Like this lighter knot, which is a type of pine, is really greasy. Great for a bearing block, but not great for a spindle or a fireboard. So basswood, great. Cottonwood, pine, if you can find really dry pine that doesn't have a lot of resin in it. Here in Florida, pine is everywhere. This is our go-to is pine for bow drill fires, and you just got to be really selective on what you get. So the trick, everyone says, what's the trick with bow drills? I think in my mind is like the techniques are something that you can learn, but the trick is to find the right wood. That's where the rubber hits the road, and that's where the magic happens. If you don't have the right types of wood, mismatching wood, fireboard that's too hard. If you're gonna have different wood, I would have the fireboard being a little softer wood, like we're using basswood here. It's a little softer than this pine, and then making sure it's very dry, right? So very dry wood is absolutely has to happen, or else you're not gonna get an ember. All right. Getting to the bearing block, if I had a choice, I'd bring one with me. I bring myself a skateboard wheel that has a bearing in it. This is where we do not want friction, right? So your spindle, and we'll get into how this spindle is carved in a second. Your spindle is going to fit on your bearing block, and you're going to apply pressure, downward pressure. This downward pressure, as you can see, and here, this is one that's been used already, needs to be completely perpendicular to the spindle, and your spindle has to be straight up and down. Using this makes it really easy to apply a good amount of pressure and have no friction at the top of your spindle. When we're using something like the lighter knot, or this is a piece of fat wood that I carry in my bag. This fat wood is great for tinder because I can take my knife and shave some fat wood and add that to my tinder bundle. All right, which helps that ember catch even more. But it's also fat wood, so it's harder because it's resinous, and it has that greasy feel to it, right? So the socket will produce less friction. So if you're going to use a wood, use a harder wood, preferably like oak, black walnut, maple, harder woods, right? If you have to use softer wood, use a pine that's full of sap like fat wood, right? So let's go back to the spindles. And what we're gonna do is talk about carving our spindles. So you notice these are used already. This one's burned in. So what we'll do is we'll give it a nice fresh edge to it by taking off that charred material. You can see that this edge is more rounded off than the others. So the end that's going in the fireboard needs to be round. And this is particularly important when we're going to do our burn-in on our fireboard. We'll get rid of some of this bark. So that's what we're looking for, is something that's round and even. If you can take a look at the profile of it and have a nice symmetrical round edge. Some people like to leave a little divot here so it locates inside the fireboard when we start it. In our burn-in phase, the other end is going to be long and pointy, right? Because this is going to have more friction than this end if this is long and pointy. So this, we're going to bring in shout out to Jason from Bushcraft Survival for creating this knife. This is the pocket forager, and I have umpteens of other types of blades. I'm a real Puko fan, so like that's been my go-to forever, is a Puko on my hip, but I don't reach for what's on my hip anymore because this is in my pocket everywhere I go. So really nice, slender top to it. Take a look at the downside of it too. Look down the spindle and make sure that that point, when you're carving it, stays in the center line of your spindle. Because if you're a little bit wonky, your spindle is going to drift all over the place in your bearing block. So now we've got a pointier end and a round end. We're going to clean up this one and we'll be right back. All right, so we're back with this spindle. We're going to use this spindle. You can see here, if we can get something in a good background here, where I took off all the burned in harder material from the last bow drill that I had. I rounded it off nicely and I left a little peak, and I'll show you how that works when we go for our burn-in. That's not essential, but it's just a little trick that kind of help it locate into the board. Right, so on this side we have a very smooth rounded edge, and then I'll flip this around. On this end it's a very sharp peak, and this one here eventually burned in. I wouldn't say burned in, but it fit to the inside of the bearing, so it doesn't move. It locks right in really well. And we're going to use the skateboard wheel because it works really well for the demo, and then possibly we'll go off and try the fat wood as well on our next one. But we're going to talk about our burn-in and what that means, and we're going to get down on the ground and do that. But before we get off to there, the next most important thing to talk about is having everything you have, all your tinder and your fire lay done before you even think about starting your bow drill off. So right here I have some tulip poplar. I have a piece of leather that I'll place underneath my fireboard to catch my ember, right? And we have to process this tinder. We have to take our time to process this tinder. like this should take longer than setting up your bow, because this is more important. You could have a beautiful ember, and if you don't have tinder that will accept the ember and actually burn, then all that time you've spent on all this and all that energy and sweating on that bow is going to be futile. So this is tulip popular. Basically what I did is I broke it down, and now we're going to break it down even more. So we're going to take this and just beat it up. And I like to do this over a table or a piece of cloth. I have a Tough Possum sit pad that works really great for this. And basically, I'm going to beat this up and make this even finer than it is. This poplar bark is really dry, and this should light pretty fast. And the reason why I'm doing this over this is because all this stuff here is candy, right? So it's really good stuff to get in your tinder bundle and make it flammable, right? So the smaller the material, just like any fire building technique, the smaller the tinder, the more flammable it's going to be. And then we'll start making a little bird's nest. Squeezing it down. When you're doing this in the field and you're doing it for real, use a lot of tinder, right? So this is a relatively small size one. If this was, I was counting on starting a fire today, I would make it bigger, right? I also have some jute string that I pulled apart, right? Pull this jute string apart, make it really hairy. I'm going to add that because I have some. Add that to the fire bundle, and a little bit of that fat wood from before. That's not really needed, but since I have some, why not? There we go. All right, so our tinder's processed. We're ready to take it over there, and let's do a bow drill. Okay, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to burn in our fireboard. And the way we're going to do here is if you take a look at some of these others that I've burned in already, right? So you can see the edge of this burn-in and the edge of this burn-in doesn't take the spindle all the way out or all the way in, right? So we want the edge of that spindle to be just about to there, okay? So what I usually do is I make a little mark with my spindle, and I come in, find where that mark is, and I make a dent. Right. Now what we're going to do is we're going to come in here and we're going to carve in a notch. This is going to help the spindle seat into the fireboard when we go for our burn-in, so it's not moving all over the place. We're not getting fancy here. Basically, we're just looking for something that's going to keep it still. You can see the progression here. This is one that's been burned in and used, right? You can see the depth. This one here was burned in, and then I cut a notch, And on this one here, we're going to do a burn in, and then we're going to cut a notch. That should be sufficient. Okay, so for our burn-in, we're going to talk about foot placement. I'm a right hand with my bow drill, so my left hand's going to come around my knee and lock in. And then the spindle is here, right? So I'll have my bearing block like so. And that's what we're looking for, is something that's perpendicular to the board and straight. Here, my foot is really close, not touching the spindle, but really close. And I'm bearing down straight with the weight of my shoulder. And it keeps the fatigue down lower. If the spindle was a little lower, it would have been, the spindle was a little bit shorter, this would be a little bit better. But I was showing a different technique with this spindle. So a little bit shorter spindle would be optimal. And that's the pressure that we're going to put it down on. So now we're going to take our bow. And lock that in. We're going to put it into the hole we just carved. And we're going to take our time here, right? So it's important to start off with light pressure and short strokes just to start it to burn in and find our groove, holding our bow back here at the string, using our thumb if we need extra pressure. And now I'm bearing down on this. And what we're looking for now is just for this thing to seat, right? For a spindle to seat in here. So I'm applying a little more pressure and just steady, long movements, letting the bow do the work. Okay, so that's our burn-in. I'm going to place this somewhere dry. And you can see here, we have a little bit of dust. Let's save that dust. And right here is where our center of our spindle was. So we're going to come back out here, and then on 45-degree angles, we're going to cut a notch, right? So right about there, and right about there. I like to mark my notch. This might need a little more. And this is something that you're only going to gain through practice and experience on how big this notch needs to be, how wide, and how deep, right? I come down now where that line is vertically, and I make a mark, and then I make another mark here, and then I transfer that back here. And now we will proceed to cut this out. Another thing to think about when you're cutting your notch or when you're setting your placement for your burn-in is it's really hard to carve the short end of the stick. So right now it's adequate. But doing this one was really hard because when I'm making my return cuts, it's hard to get a good grip on the wood. Here I've got some meat to hang on to. So start your first one, if you're doing this for the first time, a little bit like a hand's width down on your fireboard. Okay, so we have got a pretty good notch here. There's one thing that I like to do on these once I get to this point is I take a look at this area, right? So this is where your coal is going to gather, and you want air to get in there. And if the conditions aren't just right, if there's lack of air here, you're going to end up with coal dust on the top that is burned. You want like an amber colored brown dust, not a black dust. So that dust needs to fall down in here into this trap. So I like to open up the backside a little wider to give it air. As you can see, this one here was a successful burn-in and successful coal. We never really used all of this material in the depth, so the coal had to have a place to go, and that's this area here. That's why this is a little wider. So I V out the back sides a little bit. Like so. You could use a smaller thickness fireboard, but then if you don't have enough, then you risk the complete burnout to the bottom, and then you don't have a coal and you have to redo it all over again. So let's give this thing a try. All right, so I'm going to have all my materials close by, right? Before I start this cut, see this here in our burn-in, it started burnished up a little bit and got hard again. So I'm just going to take a little of that material off. So I go back to having some fresh wood. All right, so make sure my foot placement is where it needs to be. Close enough, but not touching my foot. Okay, again, I'm going to start off very short strokes, just letting it seat before I start going with full strokes. Now I start my full strokes, right? Letting the bow do the work. And a nice steady pace, about this speed is where you want to be at. You can see the dust is starting to form. And I have a little smoke. Cut. I was afraid of that. Damn it, I'm starting to drift out of the hole. That's not good. Might have to redo this whole thing. Now I'm going to speed up after I know I've got some good. You can see it's drifting out of there.
Mm-hmm.
That's a fail.
Oh, is that what's going on?
That's a fail. Yep.
You didn't go in enough.
Nope. You can see that I've got really good colored dust. I wasn't squeaking or anything like that, but when I did my burn-in was a little too far, too close to the edge. And now I have slip out of the spindle. And when I apply pressure on it, it just comes right out, right? So this is good to see, because these are the kind of problems that you're gonna run into when you do this, whether you do it for the first time or you've done it for the 100th time. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna create another burn in here and cut a notch, and we'll be right back. All right. So now we're going to let that ember form by just letting it sit there and not moving it. So that's forming a nice coal. As it starts to burn and heat up all that material, it starts to get like a clump. So you've got a more solidified coal. Okay, I think she's ready. So we're going to take our tinder basket, tinder bundle, and we can either pull this up with a knife, which makes neat work. Try not to break that coal. Place that in our tinder bundle carefully. Might as well get some of that dust. We're going to give it a gentle squeeze and give it some air. Careful when you're holding this, is that the backside you're allowing air to travel through it. Start to finish for a bow drill. Hope you learned something. Come check us out for some classes. Follow us on YouTube. Would love it and appreciate it if you give us some likes and subscribes. And when you're at it, go over to Hobo Forge Survival and also look them up on Instagram and YouTube as well. And we're all a big tribe, so we help each other out. And I picked up skills from Jason, and we like to keep the knowledge rolling and empowering everyone that we can. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.